Did you know how video games began? Did you know how we got to this $100 billion global industry to where we are today? Did you know how it all started? Did you know when it all started? I'll give you a clue. Starts with F. The 50s. You're right. What does he win, Johnny? He didn't win shit. You win to get to listen. That's what you get to win. You listen to what I say. All right? Let's start with 1952. A British professor, A.S. Douglas, created OXO. He called it noughts and crosses. We call it tic-tac-toe. That was his doctoral dissertation at the University of Cambridge. Then in 58, William Higginbotham created tennis for two. We call it Pong. He called it an oscilloscope screen for an annual Visitors' Day at Brookhaven National Laboratory in Upton, New Jersey. Pong sounds better. Now in 62, Steve Russell at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology invented Space War. Anyone remember Space War? It was a computer-based combat video game for the PDP-1. What? PDP-1? Program Data Processor 1. Then was a cutting-edge computer mostly found at universities. But it was the first video game that could be played on multiple computer installations. Now in 67 brought the dawn of the home console. Now the developers at Sanders Association, led by Ralph Baer, which anybody who knows a little history about video games knows who Ralph Baer is. He invented the prototype multiplayer, multi-program video game system. It could be played on a television. It was called the Xbox. Nope. Sorry, not the Xbox. The Brown Box. That's right, the Brown Box. Which Baer, father of the video games, licensed his device to Magnavox, which they called it the Odyssey, the first video game home console in 1972, which came with a plastic overlay to go over your TV screen. So you could play such great games as tennis or football or hockey. You know, the kind of plastic sheet that old teachers in the 90s would put on their projector so they can draw and have you sit in a dark room and look at a screen of slides. You know, that kind of plastic overlay over your TV screen. And probably not a big TV screen. If you were rich, maybe a 30-incher. Because that was about as big as they got back then. Now, over the next few years, the primitive Odyssey console, it would fizzle and die out. Now, one of the Odyssey's 28 games was the inspiration for the Atari's Pong. People know Atari. That's, some people think, is the first home console. It was the first arcade video game the company released in 72. Now in 75, Atari released a home version of Pong, which was just as successful as the arcade counterpart. So they both were a smash hit. Now Magnavox, along with Sanders Association, they would eventually sue Atari for copyright infringement. Now Atari settled and they became an Odyssey licensee. Over the next 20 years, Magnavox went on to win more than $100 million in copyright lawsuits. $100 million in lawsuits related to the Odyssey and the video game patents. So at that time, the way money inflates now, they probably were one of the richest companies in the world. That was before Bill Gates was Bill Gates, you know what I'm saying? He was just like playing the Atari in his mom's garage. Something like that. Now, the video game industry, they had a few notable milestones in the late 70s and early 80s. The first in 78, the release of Space Invaders. It was an arcade game. Smash hit. There was lines of kids on each side of the arcade just to play Space Invaders. Now, I never did. I'm not 74, so it wasn't around my time. Then the launch of Activision, which was the first third-party game developer. You know, like EA and companies who make video games. They did that in 79. Then with the introduction to the United States of Japan's hugely popular Pac-Man, Pac-Man hit the U.S. like a ton of bricks. Pac-Man was everywhere. You ever see that stupid Adam Sandler movie with the retro games attack people? Yeah, that's Pac-Man with the big mouth, chomping on little fruits. Now, Nintendo also created Donkey Kong, which introduced the world to Mario. Mario! You know, Mario, Luigi, saving the princess, jumping over stuff. And then Microsoft released the first flight simulator game. Yeah, all that fun stuff. They were pretty cool. Now, in '83, the North American video game industry experienced a major crash due to the number of factors. Basically, oversaturated game console market, competition for computer gaming, surplus of overhyped, low-quality games, and then, you know, the worst game ever, E.T., after that adequate movie, which people love the movie, but honestly, if you saw a creature like that in your house, would you touch his finger? Would you, like, hide him in your room and sleep in there and ride a bike and fly by the moon with them? No, I don't think so. I wouldn't either. Probably call an exterminator. Probably tell my dog to get him out. You know, I don't know what I would do. But I wouldn't do all those little things that the kid did with him. I mean, the E.T. looked creepy. And the game sucked. It really sucked. But as everyone knows, the crash only lasted a couple of years. Can't keep them down, you know? It led to the bankruptcy and several home computer and video game console companies crashing and burning. Now, it began to recover in '85 when they released the Nintendo, the NES, which was called Famicom in Japan. Famicom! Yeah, that doesn't have the same ring as Nintendo. Not the same thing. Do you know Nintendo has been around for a lot longer than video games, though? But they didn't make video games, but it was something different. Don't worry about it. They came to the United States. The Nintendo, it improved to an 8-bit graphics, colors, sound, and gameplay over previous consoles. So they were head and shoulders above everybody in the video game market. Basically, Nintendo was a Japanese company. It began as a playing card manufacturer. You know, like Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, playing cards, you know. They made playing cards since 1889. That's older than America. It's not really, but it sounds pretty old. They released a bunch of important video games that still are pretty strong today. Mario, Zelda, Metroid. Great games. They're all pretty popular. Metroid's kind of died out, but Zelda and Mario are as popular as ever. Nintendo imposed various regulations on third-party game developers for its system. They helping to combat rust, low-quality software. Third-party developers released many long-lasting franchises. They released Mega Man, Castlevania, Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest. Now, Final Fantasy, there's like 50 of them. So they're pretty popular even now. That's like going on like 30 years. Then in '89, Nintendo made waves again by releasing a handheld kind of gaming system called the Game Boy. The Game Boy. They bundled it with Tetris, and kids' minds got blown like their daddy when they're sleeping. Now, over the next 20 years, they released a number of successful successors to the Game Boy. Game Boy Color, the DS, the 3DS. And then began the first console war. Here comes Sega. Sega. They released a 16-bit Genesis console in North America. It was a successor to the 1986 Sega Master System, which didn't do shit. Now, the technological superiority to the NES, because, you know, they had 8-bit, Sega had 16, clever marketing, and the '91 release of Sonic. Everyone knows Sonic. I loved Sonic. Sega was my shit, so I sound biased. I am. Sega was my shit. Now, they made significant headway against the older rival in '91. Nintendo released the 16-bit Super Nintendo console in North America, launching the first real console war. Now, in the early to mid-90s, it saw the release of popular games on both consoles, new franchises like Street Fighter, Street Fighter 2, Mortal Kombat, fighting games, but Sega were depicting blood and gore. And Nintendo didn't want to go that route. But in response to the violent video games, Congress wanted to get involved, so Sega created a video game rating system. They created it in '93. It basically provided descriptive labeling for every game sold on a Sega home console. The console later gave rise to the industry-wide entertainment software rating, which basically on every video game, you see the TV, the MA in the corner, or the E, or the whatever else it says. Now, in the mid-90s, they were getting so popular, some games made it to the big screen, like Super Mario movie, Street Fighter movie, Mortal Kombat movie. Again, Mortal Kombat was better than Street Fighter. Sorry, all you gamers, but it's true. And Mortal Kombat was a better movie than Street Fighter. I know, you had to hear it, somebody had to say it, it just was. Now, with a much larger library, lower prices, and successful marketing, the Sega had leapfrogged the Nintendo in North America by this time. But in Japan, Nintendo still held supreme. Now, with the leap in computer technology, the fifth generation of video games ushered the three-dimensional era of gaming. In '95, Sega released the Sega Saturn, the first 32-bit console that played games on CDs rather than cartridges. So no more blowing on your cartridge and doing your little tricks to get your Sega or Nintendo to work. They released it 5 months ahead of schedule. The move was to beat Sony's first foray into video games, known as the PlayStation, which now reigns supreme over everybody, which sold for $100 less than the Saturn, and it launched later that year. The following year, Nintendo released the N64. Now, Sega and Nintendo released their fair share of highly rated on-brand 3D titles like Virtua Fighter on the Saturn, Super Mario 64 on the N64. The established video game companies couldn't compete with Sony's strong third-party support, and it helped secure PlayStation numerous exclusive titles. Simply put, Sony dominated the video game market and will continue to do so into the next generation with the PS2 and then the PS3, to where they took over. The PS2 was the first console to use DVDs when it went up against the Sega Dreamcast, which flopped, Nintendo GameCube, which flopped, the Xbox, which didn't flop, but didn't do as good as the PS2. Now, the Dreamcast, considered ahead of its time and one of the greatest consoles ever made by several reasons, basically had the capability for online gaming. But it was a commercial flop, like I said, and ended Sega. Well, the console of Sega. Sega keeps making games, but stopped making consoles. Then the modern age of gaming began in 05, 06, the Xbox 360, the PS3, the Wii, high definition, 3D virtual reality. Oh, it is here. The greatest gaming in the world is going on right now. Where will video games be in 20 years? Will there be consoles anymore? Will there be a PlayStation 9 or an Xbox 42? We just don't know, because this game is not over. Please like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed it.